Welcome to the Unmet Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unmet Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. As you know, my name is Mary Baker, and I'm here to give you the education, the tools, and the motivation to identify just what's in your way today and what you can do about it. Because remember, empowerment always comes from doing. And that means truly identifying what's really going on, what's really causing the issues, and the positive changes you need to make to increase your self-confidence, take care of your relationships, and take charge. Okay. So today we're in episode 7, and we're going to be talking all about unmet needs. You know, each episode, again, will be talking about the building blocks to empowerment, because each one of them matters, I think. And I really believe you can fix this, which is why I'm doing this podcast. So each month, for those of you who don't already know, we're going to be focusing on a particular concept, theme, or topic, or whatever you want to call it. And this month, we're talking all about healthy needs. Okay, and some of these pieces are heavy, and that's why I want to take a month for each and try to dig deep as we can, as we go along. Before we get into it, though, just a few quick announcements. As promised, the Facebook group is up and running. So I'm really excited about that. Come on in, join us. It'll be a closed group. I will make sure I keep it safe and healthy and just a place to connect and share and grab support. I'll be in there talking with you guys and asking questions and, you know, having some really good dialogue around this stuff. I think it's really important, and a lot of you have asked for a place to connect and support one another and have some loving accountability. So look in the show notes and there'll be a link to join that group, and that'll evolve as we go. It's just started. It's brand new. So even if you're the first 15, 20, 100 people in, that's good because you can get in and get settled. Okay, so last episode, we defined what healthy needs are. And if you haven't checked that out, episode 006 called Defining Needs. My hope is that by now, though, you've started to normalize having needs, number one, why they're important, and maybe you came across a few that you never thought about, and maybe it brought up some emotion, and I just want to take a second and normalize that. That's totally fine. When we grieve the dream. We grieve what was supposed to have happened. So it's actually pretty healthy. But let's get into unmet needs, like what happens when they're not met, how that goes down, and why it matters. And remember, unmet needs are human givens. You and everyone else have the same needs. Not wants, needs. And it's not about deserving them. They just are. Kind of like you need to breathe. So how do we start to what I call disown what we need? But how does this happen, right? I mean, who gets out of bed in the morning and says, I want to disown everything that I need? Of course not. It happened, or rather, it started a long time ago and probably continues. Since we learned everything we learned in our first classroom, as you often hear me say, our families, the dinner table, all those interactions, if our parents struggled to honor their own needs, which was learned in their own childhood, then they would have had a great difficulty teaching us to do so. Because, remember, we can only give another what we have for ourselves, what was given to us as children. Now, of course, most of us were probably loved and given basic needs like fed and clothed and taught and housed. But I'm not really getting into all of that today. I mean, of course, again, if you suffer from severe neglect, I think that takes some deep work and not by yourself. And I encourage you to seek some therapy or support around that because, again, the rule of thumb is the deeper the neglect, the deeper the wound, the more healing you're going to need, and the more intensive healing. I think there's graduated levels of healing. Like if you break your leg, you're horizontal for a while. People have to bring you everything. You can't do anything for yourself. But eventually, you're in a cast, you're on crutches, maybe you can hobble around, you can't carry anything. But then eventually, weeks later, you're in an ugly boot, and you can carry something. And so think of this as proportionate to the degree of wounding. So I want to get into the emotional and psychological needs today. These are a little trickier, of course. They're not as cut and dry. And if we interviewed your parents today, I'm sure they would deny ever consciously denouncing what you needed, right? Here's an example to show you what we mean here. Somehow you may have received the message that it's not okay to be an individual in the family. If you got the message, either overtly or in subtle ways, that the family just couldn't honor that. Now this could come in insidious ways, such as your parents never asking your opinion about anything. Instead, they told you, quote unquote, kind of what to think or feel or believe. Maybe the one or two times you tried to have a different perspective, you received negative feedback, people got upset, they shut down, they left the table, it didn't go well. It can be as seemingly benign as hearing these words, "Oh no, honey, there's no reason to be upset, it's okay." Or what do you really need more clothes for? Don't you have enough? I mean, look in your closet. Or that's ridiculous. That's not true. You're too sensitive. All we have to hear is this a couple of times to say, okay, I guess I really shouldn't trust. Or rather, I need to disown what I need. When they try to convince us that, well, you wouldn't want to do that, right? Because this might happen. In the end, it tells you not to trust what you think, what you feel, or maybe even just what you want. Maybe you just want some ice cream, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a mantra I want you to hold on to. There's nothing crazy about me for wanting X. There's nothing wrong with that. This is really important to understand because this is a very common way families communicate. Yet the damage can be so far-reaching without anyone even realizing it. Healthier would have been to ask you, so what do you think about that? Or you seem upset and that makes sense. Tell me more. Or maybe separating out how you feel and what you did. That's a huge, huge piece. Like hitting your brother because you're upset is not okay. Here your thoughts and feelings are validated. Being upset, quote unquote, was totally fine and understandable. But the boundaries were set around how you acted that out. Around your behavior, not your internal truth. And therein lies the huge, huge difference. This is so key because as we received these messages long enough, we started to shut down our truth because our deepest fear for all of us is to be abandoned. And that could even be emotionally abandoned. That need is so strong, so we comply because to not be approved of by our caregivers is way too threatening. We also take this motto into all of our other relationships, and we will attract and be drawn to those folks we need to please. And those people can't honor what we need. So this vicious cycle will continue. Now, of course, again, I want to mention that there are other ways that this can happen. These are more egregious. The more obvious ones, if you were verbally attacked, raged at, violating your emotional boundaries, physically abused or sexually abused. That's not what we're getting into today, but I just want to mention that. Again, if that happened to you, definitely want to seek some healing around that. That's some big stuff. So at the end of the day, we learn not to trust others to ever meet our needs because our first template, aka our caregivers, drop the ball, if that happened, and that happens in degrees, right? Remember that continuum from horrible to wonderful. Your experience probably fell somewhere along that continuum. You can see how this alone would cement the idea that we can never honor what we really need. Now, of course, the earlier these imprinting circumstances happened, the more profound, the more ingrained the disowning becomes. If we suffer from these, we need to realize that our healing may need to be deeper and take longer. The other thing I want to mention is cultural and religious influences can also help to cement this way of being, especially if they fostered the idea of being selfless and caring, to the extent that we give up what we need to do so. And I think there's a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of perpetuating of myths around that. We may have learned that it is selfish, quote unquote, to put ourselves first, to not jump when someone else says they need something, rather than realizing our need for self-care in the moment and having an honest negotiation. That is so common. I work with people every day on learning how to negotiate. We may have witnessed a parent complaining to another parent about something and then following through on something they really didn't want to do. Even glorifying, perhaps, giving to others regardless of how it costs them, the martyr syndrome, wiping their brow and saying, "Oh my gosh, that was so awful, but I had to do it. I had to do it. I couldn't not do it because." When they were being stressed and leaking this out all over us instead of taking care of what they need in the moment, we learned. We learned to put ourselves last, our needs last, or worse, to simply not have any. Because having them would have created a big problem. So I want to talk about some specific examples of unmet needs. Now, again, every need on that never-ending list, there's so many out there. I just want to take a few to give you some ideas, but what I want you to do is I want you to look at the entire list, write some of your own on there that you've noticed, and then really assess what was unmet for you. So this is just a few examples. The big one is secure attachment. Secure attachment and its opposite, the feeling of abandonment, is a big, big deal. If you're doing work on yourself and you have some attachment struggles, they're going to take a lot longer to work on, but they're so important at the core of every relationship. So when you were a child, that meant knowing you wouldn't be abandoned physically or emotionally. And there's lots of ways to be abandoned. We talked about that in previous episodes. Your parent could have been right there in the kitchen with you, but withdrawing love because you pissed them off. You didn't do things perfectly. You didn't eat your dinner. Maybe you yelled and screamed and had a tantrum. Maybe they just couldn't. They were too self-absorbed. They were addicted. They were immature themselves. Healthy attachment creates a secure attachment to yourself. I know that's kind of abstract, but think about that for a moment. You're more secure within yourself. And then, ideally, as you have relationships with others, as you grow up, they're secure as well, and they're healthier, and they're not chaotic. People aren't breaking up every other week and getting back together. When they're unmet, there's a lot of push and pull in relationships and a lot of drama. A lot of drama. You know, Bowlby, one of the theorists, and there's a link to his stuff in the show notes, talked about several different unhealthy attachment styles. I'm going to tap them here. This is a very deep subject, so it's one I encourage you to go look up and explore yourself. The first one is ambivalent attachment. What that means is a child who is ambivalently attached becomes really upset and freaks out whenever he gets separated from his parent. Here's why. Underneath of that, deep down, the kid knows they can't really rely on his caregiver whenever he is in need of something. I know that sounds kind of ironic on the surface, like, Why would he be so freaked out when mom is gone? It's because there's so many unmet needs for security there. The next one is avoidant attachment. So the kid, finds ways to keep away from his parents. This is usually found when parents are extremely neglectful or very abusive. So, of course, the child has to protect himself from them as much as possible. Disorganized attachment. This is when there's like a mix of attachment styles between the child and mom and dad. When the parent acts as an apprehensive caregiver, reassuring one moment, and messed up the other, it creates a lot of confusion. So obviously the title disorganization. So as you can see, attachment is a very big deal. It's at the core of the health of our relationships and something important to look at. That's one of the big needs. The next one that I think is really important is mirroring. And when that's met in a healthy way, it means that others reflected back your truth when you were little with warmth and empathy, without judgment, maybe even a little appreciation. When mom said, "Look at you, look how hard you're working." Or dad says, "You have just a gift for writing." They're reflecting back as best they can your truth, like what really exists about you, even if you're having a really crappy day or if you're acting out, right? So that you learn to trust that mirror. Because they, especially early caregivers, remember 10 and under, we took what they said as gospel. And so if they were healthy enough, we could trust what they were saying was true. And we internalized that and believed it and lived it. Now, when this need is not met, and there's two ways I think that we cannot have this met. One of them is toxic mirroring, unhealthy mirroring. They're like distorted mirrors, like in a fun house. You're looking in them and you're like, whoa, is that me? They keep you doubting yourself. Maybe they're shaming messages. Their own stuff being projected onto you. Like maybe their own weight issues or not feeling smart enough issues. They had to keep you down. Instead of accurately reflecting back your truth that they see. The other way is maybe not having any mirroring at all. Maybe there was a vacuum. Maybe you felt invisible. Maybe parents died. Maybe they were just busy, had no time or ability to give you that. Maybe there was a sibling that got all the attention instead. Maybe parents went AWOL emotionally. Maybe they were just preoccupied, self-absorbed, or just didn't know how. I think that's at the core of it. And hopefully you're seeing the parallel process here. As you start to do this work or continue this work or wherever you are, there's a parallel process that would have had to happen for them. And the more you do this work, the more you will see, oh, the math doesn't work, does it? They couldn't give me what they didn't have. The next need, and we've heard this often, unconditional love, which some argue isn't possible. What I would rather call it is it's not so condition-based. Again, you were loved as is. There is a separation iterated day in, day out. We love you. We may not like your behavior, honey. No, you can't whack your brother just because you're pissed. But there's nothing wrong with you as a person. There were boundaries. But there was never any vibe saying, if you're perfect, we'll love you. But if you bring home a B-, forget it. And that's where the unmet need comes in, when it was conditional upon X. And fill in that blank. A lot of you have shared with me, it was your behavior. You had to be compliant, perhaps. Maybe your grades had to be absolutely wonderful and your room perfectly clean. Basically, you got manipulated to be what the parent needed in that moment because they couldn't handle conflict. They couldn't handle you being pissed off. They couldn't handle you not going with the program. The next one is to be an individual. Obvious, right? But think about that one. Were you really allowed to have your own thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your struggles, your fears, your needs, your talents, your screw-ups without someone jumping in and trying to fix it for you? Or control it somehow? Or you didn't go with the flow, you had a different political view from your family? Boy, we're experiencing a lot of that in our country right now. Maybe your values were a little different. When they're unmet, the message is very clear. Think like us, be like us, conform, conform, conform. We do this to kids when they enter school. Turn off your right brain, get in line and do math like the other kids are doing. You have to be like the rest of the class. The other way is privacy. And that means your boundaries weren't violated. Your physical boundaries, your emotional boundaries, your psychological boundaries, and even your intellectual ones. And when we get into boundaries work next month, I'll dive more into this. But for now, just, examples are, why do you think that? Being raged at, not given privacy. Maybe your sister was allowed to snoop through all your stuff and grab your clothes and take your CDs or whatever. Maybe your parents snooped. Maybe they went through your diary. Maybe they went through your room. Maybe they interrogated you at dinner about everything you did that day and why you did it and who you're hanging out with and da-da-da-da-da. Privacy. The next one is belonging, and you will continue to hear me talking about the importance of this belongingness need being met. It is so curative and so important. It means I belong to a good enough group, not perfect. We have a good enough identity. My family has values that they not only talk about, but I see them, not perfectly, again, but good enough played out. I see caring, I see spirituality, I see fun, I see loving, I see responsible. It's talked about and it's followed through. And my parents modeled that. Guys, gangs and cults have it right, don't they? They knew exactly who they are. They have very stringent rules for belonging, and they're very clear about that. And so people who don't have a lot of that in their life are so prone to being sucked into something like that. There's also belonging to the larger community. And it means that the family doesn't isolate and they're interconnected with extended family, with the neighborhood, with the youth group, with the Little League, whatever it may be. Because an unmet need in this, the family isolates. There's very poor identity, if any. There's a lot of control, probably a lot of abuse and or neglect. And you learned it's not safe to belong because it's not safe to be vulnerable. And then it makes it harder for you to connect to groups in the future. Even sitting in a classroom, you probably felt really set apart. Set apart is the term everyone uses. There's just something different. Can you really connect? The last one I want to explain is meaning and purpose. And that means when I have that need met, I have a sense of a larger picture. I have a sense of where my gifts fit into that larger picture. I have a sense of faith and hope. I have a why, or several why statements that guide my life. When this need is unmet, there's no sense of a larger picture. Maybe you feel spiritually empty or disconnected. Maybe you've been spiritually wounded in the past. That happens all the time, either in your family or family and church or temple or wherever you went. So you could have wounds that need to be healed. So in other words, the bottom line is if your needs were not able to be met, the only choice you had was to disown them or act them out. Next week, we're going to get into, how do we act out this stuff? Because that's really important. That's a whole topic in and of itself. But just stop for a moment and think about it. Your brain is just so good at adapting. I mean, that's how we survived in our environment, is we adapt over time. If not, we'd be a mess. If you couldn't adapt to that new route to work, you wouldn't get to work. But your brain adapts slowly but surely until you don't even notice. So that's how that was happening. Those who work with me for a long time know I talk about manipulation, like carbon monoxide poisoning. You don't even realize you're sick until you get out in fresh air for a couple weeks. Again, your internal truth couldn't exist. This is so key because as you received these messages long enough, you started to shut down your truth. Because our deepest fear is to be abandoned. And that need is so strong, so we comply. Because not to be approved of by our caregivers is way too threatening. But what I'm saying today is just as threatening, if not more threatening, is losing who you are. Letting go of your truth, denying your gifts, denying what's so cool and so unique and so special about you. I love this Maslow quote. He says, "A musician must make music. An artist must paint. A poet must write, if he is to be ultimately at peace with himself." Owning what you needed, owning what you still need today, is a huge step towards peace with yourself. And you're going to be so much nicer to be around. We all are when our needs are met. When our needs are met. Whether they're basic, whether we need a nap, we need rest, we need fuel, we need learning, we need love, encouragement, we need security, we need space, whatever we need. On days when those needs are basically met, notice how much better you feel. And notice how people just like to be around you. We like to be around people who take care of their own needs. So this is really important stuff. Okay, so I want to do an exercise. Again, if you are walking or you're running or you're driving, just think about the answers. And then when you get home or if you have time later, I do encourage you to set aside 10, 15 minutes, replay this part of the podcast and write it out. Because writing, not typing, but writing with pen and paper is really, really powerful. So if you can, grab a pen and paper and get ready to tap into some of the early messages you may have received. Here are the rules. I'm going to read you a sentence starter or a stem, and you're going to quickly write 4 to 6 endings or whatever you can write to that sentence without thinking about it. Don't worry about how crazy it'll sound or if it doesn't make sense. Just write them one after another very quickly. They can be negative, they can be positive, they can be neutral. They all matter. It's distorted to think that they should all be positive or all be neutral or all be negative. Just write your truth. It will come. Okay, ready? Here we go. And I'll give you some time and play some music in between so you can do this. Number 1. My family taught me that my needs were. My family taught me that my needs were. Number 2, when I spoke what I needed or became upset, when I spoke what I needed or I became upset. Number 3, in my family, my caregivers honored their own needs by. In my family, my caregivers honored their own needs by. I was sad, angry, or afraid, others would. When I was sad, angry, or afraid, others would. Number 5, being selfish means. Being selfish means. And number 6, if I took better care of me. If I took better care of me. Okay. And don't worry if you didn't have time to do all of it. Just take some time later, stop the podcast, write, go back. It's all good. But look at your answers, or if you were just thinking them out, just think about them for a moment. You know, it's believed by writing what comes up without filtering it allows us to tap into our core truth and lets us see what some of our core beliefs about life, about ourselves, about relationships are. Know that these beliefs have been driving the bus, whether you are aware of them or not. And your answers may give you some insight into where you want to do some healing. That's the whole point of this exercise. It's just raising awareness. That's it. And what's important to remember is that when we disown our needs, we are disowning ourselves. And as we'll talk more about next week, we're trying to get them met. We just find some really unhealthy ways to do that. People that work with me hear me say often, these are needs, not wants, and we will get them met either in healthy, appropriate ways or unhealthy ones. Needs are so important. I'm hoping you had a moment listening to this today to think about it. And even if you already knew this stuff, maybe you slid off track and you just want to get back on, and that's cool. And that's going to happen. We're not always going to be aware of what we need in the moment. We're not always going to be able to meet them. I want to close out with something that you can do during the day. A lot of folks, if they had these needs disowned or unmet or what have you, have a hard time reaccessing. And we're going to get into this more in a couple weeks, but I want you just to think about as you go through your day, just stop for a second and say, okay, what's going on? What do I need? Like, do I need a nap? Do I have a headache? Do I need some rest? Just acknowledge and try, if you can, to acknowledge what other people might need too in that moment, especially if you have kids, and why that makes sense. Just grounding in that idea, that concept, that it's okay to have those needs and you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And eventually you'll learn better and better and better ways to get them met. So I hope this was helpful today. Go over to the show notes at ownitpowercast.com, look up episode 7, and you will see links to attachment. You'll see links to attachment, and there is a download there if you want to sign up. And that's the list of the sentence stems, and I'll throw a few more in there to get you thinking. If you are already part of the tribe, you should have gotten it in your email today in the tribe newsletter. So hopefully you have that and you can do that. Again, these kinds of exercises are great to do like every day for a week. They're not just a one-off, because every time you do them, you'll probably just reveal deeper and deeper truths, which is really wonderful. So thank you for joining me today. Thanks to all of you who have let me know that this podcast has been really helpful. The material has been helpful and it's helping you grow. I hope it helps you grow. I hope you take this and use it. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Go to ownitpowercast.com. Shoot me an email. Connect with me on social. Let me know how this is helping you. Keep the focus on you. Keep paying it forward, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.